The last season of Dragonflight has ended. We are wrapping in the pre-patch keys into this discussion, but we are going to do our regular review of all the disbands on the spreadsheet. If you guys aren't aware, I document every single run on my channel. I do this for a very specific reason because I believe the spreadsheet has the technology to give you guys the information you might be looking for. For example, if you want to see how every Azure Vault goes, how every key with a Shadow Priest goes, how certain keys with certain affixes go, you have the filters on the spreadsheet to filter every single run, and every single run has a VOD attached to it. But on top of that, we also keep the disband spreadsheet to exemplify just how bad the problem has gotten. When I started doing these reviews, it was to try to raise awareness around what might be the most common disband reasons. It's kind of morphed into something else now at this point. I think last season, people from like outside the sphere of influence, especially people who don't pug a lot, might have seen these videos and thought this is me like kind of blaming others or bashing others. At the end of the day, I'm just documenting what happened on my stream, and now I'm reacting to it because it seems like it's a fun and engaging thing to do for YouTube. All those reasons that are listed there are the reason that the key actually disbanded though. In the past, this was another problem with these videos where people would think I was trying to boil down an entire run of failures into one thing, but failures do not mean a key should disband. This is a very important point that I feel like I always need to make when I make these. Just because you have, say, 100 deaths or something like that, that's not the same thing as a disbanded key. The key being overtime and the key not finishing are two different things in my eyes. And honestly, I feel like they are two different things in the game's eyes, but a lot of people don't recognize that fact. Anyway, we're going to take a look at some of the best ones of the season. There have been some crazy moments. This is not season 3 though. Season 3 was the bright spot of the expansion for us in terms of wacky moments. So we see that the disband rate is actually quite down compared to the previous season, only 50%. Yes, only 50%. But I think a lot of this is due to the last 3 weeks really inflating it. We went on some pretty bad stretches throughout the expansion, so I do think that the pre-patch really picked this up, but it probably would have still been under like 55% overall for the season. There wasn't any like crazy moments either. Like I don't feel like any one of these is just an all-star moment that needed its own clip or own commentary as well, which is usually a good thing. That usually means the season is relatively well received and people aren't like acting like total fools. As you see, it did start early and often. This was like day 2 of the season, one of the first keys we did on that day, and you could tell people just came agitated. You know, it's really unfortunate how this disband culture has become so pervasive that people, especially early in the season, can't even finish keys when they obviously need gear and frankly probably a lot of learning still to be done. Even though these dungeons were returning dungeons, it did not go well early on. Especially I really thought that this was going to be the easiest season out of all 4 because I expected, since everybody would know the dungeons or they'd have that opportunity to have learned the dungeon some point in the past, this would mean starting out the season would be easier, but that is definitely not the case. In fact, I would say this was the hardest first week of the expansion in my eyes. And we had a lot of stuff like this where people were giving up very quickly, but this guy, you know, this Ragnaros shaman here says GG after 1 wipe on the second boss, which is a pretty hard fight on a tyrannical fight no matter what. The paladin whose key it was asked him to try to complete it, but it's too late. Ragnaros Shaman, he's gone. This was also the season that we saw the most return offenders. This guy we actually featured in the season 3 video as well. Now, nothing like crazy happens in this key, but it is shocking to see the same lever mentality just being a permanent thing, a permanent fixture in this guy's life. This was also a real big issue too this season. This dungeon was very, very difficult because we had so much fixation on people bringing augmentation evokers, and they make this last fight so difficult when we do not have good priority damage for these totems. Doing low key with augmentation evoker, you basically get none of the benefits and all of the negatives. The spec's renowned for its ability to help people survive, but in these low keys, there's not really any need for it. All you end up having is just a worse DPS, and you see these totems getting off every time. We had to do multiple pulls on this. This was basically a completion key at this point. Everybody knew that, and this guy still ends up leaving anyway, which is unfortunate because at the end of the day, all we needed to do was switch to devastation, and this probably would have been super easy. I worry about this in the War Within 2. People are so fixated on this spec, and it's just such a difficult thing to bring to some fights where you need like hard and fast switches to certain mechanics. Are there fights like that in the War Within? I'm not exactly sure where and when those things will come, but we know Mist Eternus Scythe was always famous for this. This was a fight that was like heavily impacted by your ability to do very good burst DPS, and if everybody's looking at Og as like the savior and they're doing this, behaving this way, then the reality is that that dungeon might be one of the hardest next expansion. Here's a great one here. We had the Rester Druid saying, please don't do this trash with the boss. boss. If you're not aware, this trash, when it gets below 40% health, it buffs everything around it to deal more damage, yes, but also take more damage, making this fight considerably shorter. So we try to be a good teammate here and there and just give this guy what he wants, even though I know it's going to make the dungeon harder. But here we have the like comment. I mean, honestly, is it a bug at this point? It's hard to even say. Like, you see when the boss is like sideways, you standing on the edge of the line is not sufficient. I also get hit, but the augmentation evoker does get hit too, and he dies to it. Same thing happens here. Balanced Druid just on the edge of it ends up getting clipped by it too. Now, because, you know, everybody's dead and the ads aren't getting killed properly, we're just going to basically just like bleed out here at this point. Then after all that, the Balanced Druid who got hit by the mechanic says trash heals and leaves. This was also the season of the frog. I cannot believe how many problems this fight created. This was a big problem in season 2 for low keys. I feel like this is one of the easiest fights mechanically, but for some reason people just can't seem to wrap their head around moving these frogs towards the boss accurately and then keeping them there. We had to basically like develop strategies as a community to work around this because players are unable to just kite the frogs accurately through the circle. We started moving the boss like super far to guarantee that like no matter what, people can just sprint away. It's actually like crazy to think like this fight might have been one of the hardest fights. Look at this. Every single frog is just like a mile away from the boss there. You would not think that this would be this complicated, but we actually had some incredible submissions too on that front. If you've not seen them, you really should. This dungeon absolutely had our number though, dude. This was definitely my worst dungeon of the season. I've never really felt comfortable in it. The timer was very tight, and the one where the disbands hurt the most because I did feel like I needed a lot of reps and preparation for this dungeon to go well, kind of like the throne of the season. But like we said, there is a lot of repeat offenders this season, and as you see, you might recognize the shaman's name. Last time he was here as a DPS shaman. This time he's now here as a healer. Dies to the bleed. This is like week 2 or 3 and just instantly leaves. He says, "We don't have enough time, guys. Good game. Nice try." This was kind of why I started doing this though in the first place, because I was hoping that you're going to see the repeat offenders and you'd be able to like make some better informed decisions on who you're inviting based on this. Now this one's a gem. I got to include this one just for this reason here, okay? When I started this key, I knew I saw this guy's name before, all right? We're talking about this demon hunter. Couldn't remember where I knew this guy from, but I knew I recognized his name. So we do the key, like I don't put too much thought into it, but obviously wiping to the first boss on a fortified. And then just without any word at all said, you know, everybody just scatters to the wind. So I was like racking my brain over why I knew this guy, and then I realized that I had already ran into this guy in Shadowlands. And not only did I run into this guy, it was a pretty famous moment for me. It was a moment where I felt like totally disconnected from the game's community. This was when I decided to basically stop doing Progression Mythic Plus and switch to Alliance. I actually switched from Horde to Alliance because I had heard that Alliance didn't have any of this kind of thing happening. You wouldn't have this harsh of a reaction to mistakes. You would have a more calm group, and it was really cool. And it was true, actually. It was legitimately true. This guy kind of became a legend because of it. I think it's particularly interesting that this dungeon, Necrotic Wake, is actually returning now too. So the reason that this guy ultimately leaves is because, as you see, this Resto Shaman gets hit by, this was a seasonal affix. The mob basically does a ton of AoE damage and then puts down a like kind of fire patch on the ground that you're meant to move out of. Healer's struggling. This is very easy key. It's probably still going to be easy in the War Within, but this was probably the easiest key ever. We are, I mean, effectively looking like we're about to wipe to this, and this guy leaves what is like the Azure Vaults of this expansion. Leaving Azure Vaults over a single mob killing a few people really put things in perspective to me on what this community is about. Here's another crazy one though. We had a lot of problems with Ultimate, and then some problems that just get made up. This dungeon was hard for so many different reasons, and like we talked about earlier, like maximizing the actual timer in this dungeon became a really big point of emphasis in season 2 when it was in. So we always bring these mobs in. This seems like very low risk. Like, I get it, people are dying to it every once in a while, but like it's really not that dangerous even for like your average pug group. But I think the funny part is that a lot of people probably don't understand why it's being done, like we saw with that druid, and then we see again with this, right? So you see I have just targeted Bromac, right? Both of those mobs are actually dead. The point of it is to get this double buff on the boss to make him die way faster and make the fight way shorter. And as you see, that debuff just went away. Where did it go? It's supposed to be 2 debuffs on the targets every time the mobs go below 40%. They hit every target around them with this debuff that makes them faster to kill. But as you see, that one only has 1. That's the boss, and now it has 0. This is because the group dispelled the buff. I said, did you just sue that? Druid, he raises his hands. It wasn't me. It wasn't me, bro. The Druid says, we want that buff. Guess what we don't do after dispelling the buff? The boss is at 2 million health. It's so close. If we just did dispel the buff, it would be dead and we'd be moving on. But yeah, that's going to be it for us. This was also the season where like the flavor of the month adherence was the worst I think I've ever seen it. And a lot of the problems with it is that people are adhering to specs that are simply not working out in pugs. Shadow Priest was the biggest offender in my eyes. And that's saying something because you guys might have already heard me talk about things like Og Evoker and also Fire Mage over the years. It just seemed like every single Shadow Priest we played with this season was somebody like this. The guy says, you know what priority damage is. This AoE shit is not getting us anywhere, and then leaves after some deaths to trash. No shortage of the backseaters as well. Frost Mage from Azralan says, tank, we're not timing if you pick one pack. This is actually probably the only good thing about them changing the affixes the way they are, is there's not going to be this mentality where like, oh, it's not fortified, we now need to pull half the dungeon, and then we just fail to a boss, right? Which is of course exactly what happened, by the way, if you couldn't tell. Tyrannical keys were just so much harder in season 4 than fortified keys. I think like the disband ratio was like 67% on tyrannical keys and like under 55 on fortified keys for a long time. And that's the only good thing about them making it so every key is tyrannical, is hopefully players will finally recognize that bosses are just more dangerous than trash most times. And when people overly emphasize things like pulling trash more effectively when you can't even kill a boss, it gets very frustrating as a tank. But if we had to pick one boss that was the biggest hit factor of the season, it was certainly the Gulping Goliath. It was ironically the Gulping Goliath too because of the whole frog thing in Mop Remix, which was during this season as well. The fight was just owning people, and it's just like destroying groups, and it's crazy because it looks like the easiest mechanical fight in the entire season in my eyes. We got Gucci sliders dying to just the damage in the first phase. You see how I'm at this point in the season, I'm now basically like running the boss as far away as humanly possible to help these guys not be in a problem when this mechanic comes out. We still can't keep these things near the boss. See that even though I moved the boss like 50, 60 yards, it's still impossible for people to keep these things near the boss. Guy dies. I don't know if he dies from 10 stacks or what, takes the res, dies to AoE damage again. You can't see it because it's under the webcam, but the guy hasn't used his dispersion a single time, and the healing priest says an all-time great, priest, use a deerfensive, DEERFENSIVE. Absolutely love this. We still joke about this to this day. Anytime somebody dies 3 times in a fight, it's time for them to use a deerfensive. The thing I've come to appreciate the most about Mythic Plus though is just the physical comedy. Just like the one-liners and the funny zings that you see get thrown around in chat, or the reason that Mythic Plus can be so funny at the same time, as so frustrating at times. This fight, obviously, you know, a very hard fight. We're gonna res that guy. He's gonna just res into ice and just get one shot. He's gonna say, wow, all caps, wow. Monk says, who's the healer, by the way, says, kind of tough to position with the ice like this in 4 different lines. Then just hits him with the cold-hearted hunter dying 50 yards away with turtle is standard though. GG, Ed is the first to leave the group. But we again run into yet another channel legend in season 4 disbands on my actual characters. This is pretty crazy to see this guy back again. We featured this guy in season 3, like the submitted playlist. This guy is doing a 20 Waycrest at this point. The trash in the hall in the previous room is being skipped, and the warlock just aggroes it and then just dies to threat as he tries to drag it onto the tank to force him to take it. So he dies to threat and then just instantly leaves the group. Then afterwards, this is what makes it crazy, is afterwards the guy who submitted the runs messages him saying, why did you pull that? His response to aggroing trash that they were trying to skip is, learn to tank. He said, you pulled a random pack and then left, lol. He says, tank it correct or have people leave. Simple. This is like 5 minutes into the dungeon, by the way. He says, you're line of sighting every pull and chaining dumb stuff together, then missing the corner pull. I don't need a dumbass who can't do a 20. So here we are again in season 4 with the fella doing it's actually kind of a hard fight. I mean, I don't think it's that hard, but if you do the mistakes that you can make on this fight, you're just never going to recover from them. And this can get particularly impossible when you have a guy die. So that guy basically just dies, from what I can tell, just the damage on the fight. It's a hard fight to heal. Because of that, now we're not going to be able to break all the trees. We don't have enough players to break them all. And you know, with those 3 trees that are still up, when he actually like smashes them or whatever and does all the damage to us, that is going to kill everybody. So the guy who insulted the previous guy in the previous season says, Evoker didn't spread. Not sure how he has a 15. Carried clearly. Now this guy's actually devastation, which is really funny because you don't really make a a comment about augmentation getting carried. This guy's not even augmentation. This run basically is a summary of like all the different red flags I've warned about over the years though. We talked about people who don't need the key. We talked about people with childish names. We talked about people playing Flavor of the Month specs. Guess who's exemplifying this at its height? Go ahead and just look at the names on the screen and I think you'll have your answer. When we started making the sheet, we expected to see a lot of return offenders from the Azralan realms, from the Ragnaros realms. These are things we already knew were happening since Legion, but I was really shocked to see it how many people go on this spreadsheet from the Illidan realm. It's actually a case now where I feel like the Illidan realm is the one that causes the most issue out of all the realms. So we are going to wipe to this very commonly difficult pack here. This is very, very common because if you miss one or two kicks, people start dying and then they get spread out because of how difficult it is to traverse this dungeon quickly. You just end up having people getting here at different times, and then as you see, the Warlock gets back, he dies again. This is a really, really common place to wipe. Watch the comment in the chat though from the Hunter. This is my favorite part of this run. So of course the Illidan guys leave first. The Hunter was the key holder. He says, why are they S tier? You see the damage chart in the bottom of the screen. I'd switch it to overall. 25 minutes through the dungeon and the mage has done 200 million less damage than the Hunter. 343k overall compared to the top player doing 523k. It's actually kind of funny how similar some of the disbands are. Like when I'm reviewing it, I'm looking at the keys. I'm like, oh, this is the exact same thing that wipes us every single time we do this dungeon. We're doing Bromac again. And what a surprise. The ads are getting way out of control. People are getting hit by mechanics. People are not interrupting the stone spikes, especially, but also the chain lightning. Just lots of casts getting out in general. And then it's like almost like if the guy is trying to represent the previous run we already showed, they blame the healer. Like of all things, blame the healer. There's like 14 ads up. He says heals is trash, then leaves in the middle of the fight. You know, we already talked about this boss. It's a particularly frustrating one though, because we, again, just like the necrotic weight conversation we had earlier, we know how easy this timer is. So having deaths here and me being able to solo save this fight, I mean, it's a very, very doable key. So when people just sprint out of a dungeon because they died, like I don't even know what the excuse is at this point. If you die on a fight and the fight is still a kill, like where are you going? What's the rush? What's the rush to leave here? I love the responses too. The 100 save is noob, by the way. N-O-O-B. I love that. 4 dots from the noob. Barthalas Hunter says, stupid Locke. Shitter, Locke was doing no damage. I mean, yeah, they got it right. Here's a good one. This guy is basically like upset because I did not link a route as a healer in a 16, and it again is a tyrannical week. Like always, we know the hardest part is definitely not going to be the route. It is going to be the bosses. No surprise here. We get to the boss, have a couple big problems unfold, and we get the quad dot from the Illidan Druid who is mad about the route on the tyrannical week. So, you know, again, another 12 million solo save here. We could probably still very easily upgrade this, but you know, the Illidan Resto Druid is saying die, keys dead. He says we can't listen to simple instructions. The Warlock is like the voice of reason here. He says you don't need to be salty, mate. It's not your key. The Illidan guy says I told you to stack then move, and you just go willy-nilly. Warlock says did I stack and drop or no? The Druid says yep, everyone did. Then says no, I guess confused on what the original question was. He says, is that something that triggers you, that people don't listen to you? A deep-rooted psychological question there in the middle of a Mythic Plus boss. He says, yeah, when people can't listen or link a route, yes, it does trigger me. He says, you died to pressing 0 buttons. Same with the Demon Hunter. It's just weird. Is it weird? I feel like this probably happens all the time. This is why the bosses are so difficult. He says, pressing 0 buttons while I survived the AoE after you died. You're right, broski. I said, we good. I got this. Is actually after the guys already left. Yet another Illidan to the chart. Now this is a crazy one because we've been talking about like repeat appearances, and this is like the same guy in 2 keys back to back. This guy's on the sheet though because the first group, if you couldn't tell, he didn't invite a Bloodlust. It was like a really, really, really bad comp, and we're basically going to do the same thing in this dungeon. Just another really bad comp for this dungeon. No Bloodlust yet again on a tyrannical week is a really dangerous thing on this dungeon. This time around, you can actually see like a much bigger problem though. Like the guy's doing very, very, very little damage. There was all kinds of things being said in the chat about whether or not he like bought the account or if he like is playing somebody else's account or something like that, because this guy was like a very high level player. I think he had like 17s and 18s done on the character at the time. But yeah, to nobody's surprise, you know, again, Watcher Iridius claiming a group's live here, just unable to do the fight, no bloodlust. That's just another disband on that, but it was just really crazy. That was the same guy 2 keys in a row So there's the overall, by the way. You see the overall of the Demon Hunter, 273k compared to 514. Well, now it's time for the pre-patch ones. There's not crazy moments that happen in the pre-patch, and we probably could have delayed this another week or two and saw even more, but you know, pre-patch brings with it its own problems. Just adjusting to like new builds and new things about your class can be difficult as well. I really struggle with this pack. This is the first time I had done it without slappy hands, and a lot of the gathering was very complicated. Now I felt like the evoker just gets hit by the like ground AoE thing from the mob, and then, as you might not be able to tell right now, but it is a 1 minute and 40-second recording because this guy just dies to that and then just leaves the dungeon. Now I actually whispered him after the key, and he says that he left because his bars were like totally non-functional. And you know, like I said, the pre-patch does bring with it a new type of challenge, so you know, you gotta at least take that for what it's worth. It could very well be the case. It's frustrating. I don't know how you end up doing a key if your bars aren't working and you didn't realize it beforehand, but yeah, one way or the other, leaving on less than a minute and a half of combat, you know me, I'm never gonna have any real sympathy for. And we saw like just how easy the keys in the pre-patch actually were too, so it's like super offensive. Like the actual disbands from the pre-patch are kind of nuts because we've gained like 200 score in the last 2 weeks. The ones that are on here are just like ones like this where it's just like, you know, like fear after fear is going out here, more and more mistakes being made mechanically. Another one going out here, I mean, a lot of people are dead. I think there's only one guy in range, is the Warlock, and he has his interrupt up, doesn't use it, but another fear. This is not really the end of the world, but it costs us to pull so much extra trash in this first area that it just chained us into 13 deaths. You see the number there? 13 deaths. This is the first pull of the dungeon. I've gone back and forth this over the years, but honestly, like, I feel like this is kind of on me here. Like, I should just be saving my kick for this now, especially this is the fourth one that goes out. I just feel like it's like a hard decision to make because, like, you know how difficult these earth bolts and all these other mechanics on these trash mobs are, and people are already not kicking. So like, I would hope that the one that's like shining and glowing in Plater, people are gonna see that and they're finally gonna kick that, and then, like, you know, I'll just rotationally kick the stuff that might actually be killing people outside of that, but it just never ends up working out. This was a funny one. We had this weird thing happening in this group where the circle thing that spawns those little orbs and the crystals were spawning at like the exact same moment. Typically I would try to move the boss when the orb things floating around come out because it's a lot harder to stand and attack the crystals, but as you see, it's literally the exact same moment here. Whether or not you want to say this is the actual problem with it, it just is crazy how people respond to these types of errors. And I think this example is the clearest one on why you should record your keys. I don't know if it's just because of how much damage we're doing or how maybe little damage we're doing, but again, as you see, the orb things spawn the same second as the crystals. Now, yeah, they're dodgeable, okay? Let's be very serious here. Like, you can't dodge this. You can do this fight with those orbs and those crystals together. It's at the end of the world. And as you see, they've now moved like totally out of the place where you would need to. This hardened crystal is just simply not dead. Everybody just died to that. So this guy says, would you mind moving him after he puts the bubbles down? I said, no, he did the crystals at the same time. There was no way to move him. He said, I know, but this time, he says, not blaming, asking nicely. And it's like, there's just nothing I can do. Like, I can't do anything about it. So this time I'm trying to like be even more proactive than I was in the first pull. I see it's coming up. Here we go. I start sprinting away, trying to move this boss even a few yards away, but it doesn't happen. Literally, again, the second he finishes that cast, he goes into the crystals. But again, they're nowhere near the hardened crystal, right? Like, we have full freedom to fight. There's not actually any issues here. So even though it's overlapping like this, it is not really stopping us from doing the fight. Here it comes again. Same thing. Hardened crystals are out. And pay attention to what actually, you might see this in the corner of the screen, kind of on the right side here, okay? All the pets and all the players are just not attacking it. I'm the only one over here. You know what I mean? It takes people multiple seconds to get here. So the response to this from this guy is, I'm just going to not DPS until the crystals come out so that overlap doesn't happen. It's actually like a relatively decent strategy, but he's now doing like 0 DPS on this fight, meaning the fight's just elongating itself. So like, I think at this point, like, we're pretty much just done. We probably should have just disbanded at this rate. So fair enough, like, kudos to them sticking it out. 25 deaths, 3 wipes to this fight. Here we are again on this lonely island. Look at the 3 crystals to our left just getting destroyed. The one I'm targeting is the skull, and it takes like 30 seconds for anybody to get over here. We have already had multiple dead now. And this is why you need to record your runs, because it's so plain as day what's actually the problem here. It had nothing to do with those balls. Maybe they cause a little bit of stress, but the reality is people just aren't attacking the thing that's killing us. This is doing a ton of AoE damage, and the quicker you can get this thing down, the easier the fight goes. We are simply not prioritizing killing it. We looked at it at the end. I combined all 3 pulls of Umber Skull. I was the top damage to the hardened crystal as a tank. The guy says, GG, pure insanity, then leaves, and then goes on to blame me after the key is over for us wiping there. And I said, you were really focused on all the wrong stuff there, because this is a common issue with Mythic Plus pugging. People get this idea in their head that like whatever they think is wrong is the only thing that needs to be talked about. When in reality, if you just looked at the run and you just take a minute to breathe, you will see like we simply are not doing the mechanics of the fight right. It has nothing to do with anything else. I'll leave you with this one. It seems like the perfect one to end this whole discussion and this whole video on. Neltharis, my nemesis key, the key I feel like I did the worst in, the key that I felt like I had the most troubles with understanding and kind of perfecting what we did throughout the dungeon's lifespan in this season. I think a big part of this was because it was so different from season 2, like just a completely different dungeon with the changes to the chains. I'm trying to iterate. I'm trying to make better moves. Finally, I'm getting some positive feedback on what I'm doing in this dungeon. Resto Druid, spelled like that, says, Tank, you are a god. What a great compliment. How did we come so far? What has happened in this key? I said, is that why you died on the run back? He says, nah, that was due to your dumb route. At 23 minutes in, the tank is the god, and 10 minutes later it's his fault. Everything's falling apart. What happened here was we aggroed the trash, and then I think it was the rep pally, his divine storm accidentally hits the boss. But we're gonna keep trying. We're gonna give it a shot anyway. So they're all running back because I was able to just use Shadow Meld to drop threat on the boss. Pay attention to the health bars as you see this happening. Here they come, time's ticking away. Oh, what happened there? Resto Druid just randomly dies. What happened there? Must have died to trash, right? Like runs into trash on the way back. So by the time we pull the boss again, like 3 minutes has passed since that happened. And then just this like incredible spot of irony, the perfect way to end this disband review here. Resto Druid with the name Resto Druid says defensive, and then just stands in caster form and dies. Probably the most ironic thing I've seen all season. Resto Druid named Resto Druid types the word defensive, doesn't even go into bear form, and then dies, and then instantly leaves after pulling trash on a run back. It says Resto Druid defensive, Resto Druid has died. Like unbelievable irony. So that is it, man. It has been a wild expansion, a wild ride. We did a full review of all the actual keys submitted to me. Frankly, those have just kind of supplanted this video in terms of like hilarity and wild moments. I can only imagine what the War Within is going to look like. Truthfully, I'm kind of scared, to be honest. Like, I think it's going to be probably like upwards of 80% disband rate, maybe 90, even 100% some weeks. I do plan on getting back on the beta next week to do some more testing now that they've made some adjustments and stuff. But yeah, reality is setting in here where the pug world is just kind of collapsing around us. Luckily, you guys have front row seats to it. I will always be pugging. I'm dedicated to documenting all of this and maybe someday making an impact on it. You never know, maybe Blizzard finally starts caring about pugging down the road, but as of right now, it just doesn't seem like that's likely to happen. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching. We will definitely be back with more of this type of content weekly throughout the next expansion. Stay tuned. If you guys are out there running runs, please do record them and send them in. Otherwise, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.